You're listening to Through the Square Window with me, Samira, Ahmed.
And me, Graham Kibble-White.
Hello.
This is a podcast guiding you through the UK television we watched in decades gone by.
And this month we're looking at programmes from February 1969, and it is an absolute treasury of great TV. A bit about us: we both think about TV for a living.
I am the head of TV and radio for The Telegraph.
And I present a Newswatch on BBC One and Front Row on Radio 4. And I should say why we picked February 1969, which is my partner, who's a little bit older than me, has very warm memories of when he was a chorister at St Paul's Cathedral. On Saturday nights, they were allowed to watch ITV, which is in itself a thing we should talk about sometime, the class aspect of watching ITV. But he loved Department S and he loved Randall and Hopkirk Deceased. So we've got an episode of one of those, I think, have we not?
Well, indeed we do. And let's actually have a listen to what's coming up in today's episode.
Do remember, a rose by any other name would be a carrot.
Thinking about this almost incredible episode does tell one something about the nature of civilization.
Shall I give her one reckless a backside?
Skytripper 190 established ILS for Autoland. Repeat, Autoland.
So that was Do Not Adjust Your Set, Civilisation, Saturday Night Theatre starring Sean Connery, and, yes, Department S.
A very classy lineup of shows, I think I'd agree. But before we get into all of that, it's time to catch up on a bit of correspondence. Time for the post bag. And it's a bit, I would say, like having the Christmas cake still going deliciously into February.
Our first email comes from Graham Burke. He got in touch to talk about the Star Wars Holiday Special, which Samira had nominated as her least favourite festive TV programme ever in our Christmas episode.
Graham writes about his own memories of watching the production. I had just turned 9, received a ton of Star Wars toys for my birthday in November, so I was the target market, and I remember liking all the Wookiee Life Day stuff, the Boba Fett cartoon, his first appearance, and cringing at Carrie Fisher's singing.
And he goes on to say, as a North American who grew up in the 1970s, I wanted to add some context which I think has become forgotten. And this is because we were a little bit puzzled, I think, about why would you do a Star Wars special and turn it into a kind of a weird variety show. So he says, the big genre on American TV throughout the 70s was variety. It was all-encompassing. The Brady Bunch turns out to be super successful in syndication after it goes off air, so make a variety show out of it. Mary Tyler Moore finishes a hugely successful sitcom. Get her to make a variety show. So variety shows were a big part of the landscape, he says, and commodifying Star Wars this way actually makes a lot of sense, particularly in 1978.
And he finishes with, this explains the special, but does not justify it. I agree with both of you about its dreadfulness. Also, it's not very good variety featuring Star Wars. I personally prefer the Star Wars appearances on Donnie and Marie, which had R2-D2 and C-3PO and dancing stormtroopers.
And it would be remiss of me not to add that Graham is the creator and host of the excellent Comics Code podcast, which in its first series tells the story of Superman's creators, Jerry Siegel and Joe Shuster, and how they had to campaign for decades to be recognised and properly rewarded for their work.
Also in our post bag, we heard from TV executive Liam Hamilton, who is the former controller of daytime at ITV and was in fact the launch editor of GMTV. And he's someone who's always on top of the ratings data. And he wrote, as a man of a certain age, I find the eclectic choice of programmes you and Graham discuss appealing, and the occasional references to viewing numbers compared to today's equivalent very sobering. Was there a reference to 20 million audiences for Corrie at Christmas recently, Samira? 2 million this Christmas Day. And yes, that was in our January episode, wasn't it?
It was indeed. Here's someone else, the excellent writer and yes, friend to us both, Simon Guerrier, got in touch to say how much he'd enjoyed our Christmas episode as well. And he added, it got me thinking about the telly I associate with Christmas from my childhood. For some reason, what comes to mind is Flash Gordon cartoons, which I remember watching one early morning when I must have been 8 or 9 waiting for my siblings to get up.
He then followed up clarifying it was Christmas 1982 with the New Adventures of Flash Gordon show on weekday mornings and the premiere of the 1980 movie. That was the one directed by Mike Hodges, wasn't it? Airing on Christmas Eve.
Well, okay, one last festive epistle. It's Nick Berry, and he clarifies in case your heart skipped a beat. No, he's not that one. But he wrote, your interview with Mark Gatiss sent me right back to my childhood. My father had taped a lot of the original run of BBC Ghost Stories for Christmas and would show me one every Christmas Eve from an unsuitably young age. I remember being so terrified at the cough at the end of A Warning to the Curious that I couldn't sleep. The added terror that if I didn't sleep, then Father Christmas wouldn't come was so vivid I can recall it exactly to this day. In hindsight, though, I'm so grateful to him as they are some of the finest TV ever made. And Mark is a national treasure for keeping the tradition alive.
And finally, John Williams of the World of Telly podcast. It's like getting a message from ITV to our BBC, is it not?
I know, it is a bit.
Yeah. Messaged us on Blue Sky about last month's episode, saying, as usual, I really enjoyed the podcast, this time for two main reasons. Firstly, I knew nothing about Castaway 2000, yet still found the piece fascinating. And it sent me on a trawl through the newspaper archives. The whole thing sounds like a nightmare. Secondly, I cheered when you mentioned that Graham's mum basically gave up on Coronation Street when it went to more than 2 episodes a week. That baleful event triggered the end of the golden age of the great UK soaps.
Amen. So thanks to everyone for sharing their thoughts. And if you'd like to get in touch with us, drop us a line on email at squarewindow.co.uk or find us on social media at squarewindowpod. The opening to Do Not Adjust Your Set there, and the second episode of its second series, which aired on Thames in the London region on Wednesday the 26th of February at 5:20pm. Billed as 30 minutes of zany fun, this was a sketch show for younger viewers starring and principally written by Eric Idle, Terry Jones and Michael Palin, who are only months away from entering into production on the first episode of Monty Python's Flying Circus, and also featuring David Jason and Denise Coffey and the Bonzo Dog Doodah Band.
And I was looking at Michael Palin's diaries, and after this series 2, which was the last series commissioned, and he also made the last of The Complete and Utter History of Britain with Terry Jones, John Cleese, in his diary, he said, rang me in 1969 and said, well, you won't be doing any more of those, he predicted accurately as it turned out, so why don't we think of something new? And as you say, Monty Python is to emerge out of this. I found this so delightful. Such a modern pace, such a modern speed. It starts with the desert skit where a sort of Terry Jones has crawled out of the desert and finds a kind of British holidaying couple in their deck chairs offering him tea or coffee.
At last! Civilisation!
Beg your pardon?
I've travelled 8,000 miles across the burning desert without food or water.
And Denise Coffey is so talented.
Yes.
It's just so fully formed, and they're all so young.
It's not our car, actually. It's his brother's car.
At first, I thought it was a mirage.
No, it's a humbug.
They are so young. The tempting thing is to look for kind of progenitors of Python stuff here. But that opening sketch almost has everything, doesn't it? I mean, aside from the fact that David Jason is kind of dressed as a Gumby character, and Terry Jones is a bit like the It's Man from the Python opening titles, there is such a kind of joie de vivre and confidence about the comedy, and they seem to really inhabit the archetypes that they're playing really, really easily, don't they?
Yeah, and it's got a real pace and speed to it. I mean, the attention span for this feels very modern. It doesn't feel like any sketch outstays its welcome. There's all those little parody things we take for granted. Eric Idle is a Percy Thrower type gardener. There's running jokes about sort of fairyland characters. There's sort of childlike nonsense like a handbag tree. And it's interesting that it aired quite so early. I assumed it would have been a later slot. But it shows you just how entertainment like this was put into an early evening midweek slot. I mean, it's almost aimed at children, isn't it?
Well, it's supposed to be. I mean, in theory, it is a children's show. And I think part of the reason they didn't make more was because they were unhappy with the early evening slot, because it did start to gain an adult audience. And it is really interesting. There's one whole thing which is a kind of a political discussion show parody, which just seems bizarre for a kids show.
Good evening. Tonight on Outrage, we're going to face the Minister of Education with one of his most virulent critics.
And yet it still really works.
A couple of things that really struck me was you realise how Round the Horn, the long-running radio show on what I suppose a light programme then, how many of the ideas of it are the seeds of these television sketch shows with all the parodies of things. There's a great sense of parodies of current shows. So there's Going for a Burton, which is they're sort of expert historians looking at things like toilet rolls and saying, it's an ancient manuscript. David Jason, who is, I think, the top billed star of this, is so good. He holds his own with all the others. It's the same kind of range of posh and different kinds of accents.
You all recognise that, I'm sure. There it is, at home for you. And this is for Dame Twanky, our only woman member here today.
And would you pass that, Professor Hart, to Dame Tweggy for her to tell me what she makes of that?
And I'm so used to seeing him as a Del Boy. So it's quite refreshing to remind yourself that he was a kind of satirical comic. And they're mocking expertise. They're mocking all these old experts on TV shows. I could also see why Eric Idle and Michael Palin got mistaken for each other, because they're both, quite young and the really good-looking ones of Monty Python. And they both do that thing of just going into different characters all the time. And there's also a hint of nudge, nudge, wink, wink.
Let's listen to that one, because is that the aeroplane sketch that you're thinking
that's
about?
the maths nerd who wants to get the window seat. Great punchline.
Hello. Is this your first time in the air, is it?
What?
Is this your first time in the air? I mean, I know we're not in the air yet, but if we were in the air, would this be your first time in the air, would it, eh?
No, I travel across the Atlantic twice a week.
Every week of every year?
Well, for the last 2 years, yes.
Well, on ever. That means you've been across the Atlantic 104 times. 2 times 52, 104. Isn't that wonderful? Shall I put my safety belt on?
You can if you want to,
I sort of felt that was almost, Palin playing an Eric Idle character in a way. And I just want to go back on what you said about David Jason, because I have to agree. I think he's almost the standout performer here.
Yes.
He's so adaptable and rolls with it. And it is interesting that there is... He and Denise Coffey do get a kind of additional material credit. It makes me wonder what they were adding. It makes me think there must have been a bit of knockabout. They must have chipped in with things. I just get that sense of it because it feels quite loose.
And she has such a lovely range of characters. Like, she's the kind of older female expert in that antique panel show.
Well, this is obviously a manuscript of some sort. It appears at one time to have been government property. And I would say that it was 17th century Swiss. And it's a novel. Yes, it's a novel. Oh, about China.
And the range of accents, the range of costumes, she's so selfless with it. And it's so refreshing, because we tend to think of Monty Python and the quite sexist framing of people like Carol Cleveland, often in the bikinis and things. And it's a reminder that, it wasn't necessarily like that for women comedians. And she isn't, I would say, she's not a conventional beauty, but she's really funny. She plays a huge range of characters. And then within the mix of all this, you have the Bonzos, who, again, I've done a Missing Believed White type event with the surviving members of the Bonzos. And Vivian Stanshall sort of emerges out of a sketch as he's a comic book reading conductor, introducing the Bonzos.
Oh, hello. Do you read comics? I do. This week we're doing a number called Beautiful Zelda, and it's about a girl who comes from another planet and she falls in love with an Earth boy, but he doesn't want to know. And so she goes back to the Twilight Zone, but it's not true. And a lot of it's rubbish.
And suddenly you realise how bold and fresh this band looks.
She's broken all the super hearts of the superheroes of the galaxy.
How exciting it must have been as a child to turn on the TV at 5:20 and have this show for you. That manages it's not rude, but it's genuinely funny.
But what's interesting is actually David Jason and Denise Coffey were complete unknowns. So Humphrey Barclay had put this together, and I'm wondering if the title is a riff on I'm Sorry, I'll Read That Again.
I think it
64. Yeah, it's almost like the TV version of it. And so I think he'd found them, they'd been performing locally, and he'd invited them in. Something else, when I was just doing a bit of reading around this, I found an interview with a woman called Daphne Shadwell from 1991, and she was originally the director of the entire series. And there's this website called the History Project, which has got lots of kind of audio interviews with people from the TV industry. And here's what I wanted to put to you, Samira. I wonder what you make of this. So she says, I didn't get on too well with the Python lot. I found them untrustworthy. Eric Idle was a difficult one. He would go behind my back, or I'd find him down the other end of the room redirecting somebody, or standing behind my back waving at the artist saying, no, don't do it like that. They all thought they were much grander and better than me. I found them very difficult to work with, except Denise and David, and we became a sort of isolated threesome in a way against the others. And so actually what happens was that ultimately the Pythons, or so she says, asked for her to be removed as a director, but she continued working on, so we haven't mentioned these Captain Fantastic segments.
Last week, the evil Mrs. Black, disguised as Mrs. White, the ninth housekeeper, flummoxed Captain Fantastic with a huge meal. Now
which are these again, this kind of shades of the goodies, which are these kind of silent film sequences that they do on location with David Jason as this sort of, I'm not even sure what Captain Fantastic is supposed to be. It's kind of an elderly parody of a superhero. Anyway, what happened was that she turned into, as she says, a kind of a tight unit with Denise Coffey and David Jason. And that's what they ended up. That was her only contribution to the second series, was just doing those filmed bits. So it's kind of interesting, isn't it?
Yeah, it's like the scales falling from my eyes, a bit like we did to listeners with the Mary Whitehouse Experience pilot. And you suddenly realise that a woman being treated badly is yet again the story behind the show. So interesting. I do want to talk a bit about what else is good about it, though. So there's a great skit, which is Eric Idle as the moderator, satirising news and current affairs heated debates. When you look at what's the kind of polarisation that's encouraged now by the likes of YouTube and even on Question Time, that's very much what's going on there. And there's even a joke about the BBC not taking any responsibility.
This programme is live, and viewers are warned that the BBC will not take responsibility for anything said on this show, as it's on ITV.
Yes, I love that gag. And I think as a kid, that was the kind of thing that I would absolutely adore that kind of, oh my gosh, they know they're on telly and they know they're on a different channel.
Yeah.
I that kind of self-awareness, I think, is brilliant.
I love that there's a reference, and I don't know who wrote this line, at this point we need the opinion of a woman. And David Jason is a pantomime dame. And it sort of plays with all those. Well, you think about something like Rent-A-Ghost, which we reviewed months back, and this is got some of those imagery, doesn't it? It's got the imagery of the pantomime, but they do something so much more sophisticated and satirical with it.
And the way the show ends is so lovely as well, isn't it? That it ends in, and I don't know enough about the show. I got a sense this is probably a regular thing that ends with this sort of nonsense song, doesn't it?
Lower the words!
Hey, lower the words! We want you on sweets! We want sweets!
And it's sort of everyone then comes on and starts capering around. That's the one bit where it feels to me like a kids show, but in a really good way. It's kind of, I have the same vibe of We Are the Champions, where at the end they're all allowed to jump in the pool and splash about.
Yes.
It's that kind of version, isn't it? It's sort of like the unalloyed joy. We're at the end of the show, let's all join in with this stupid song. And
it's interesting that what Michael Palin and Terry Jones go on to do is the complete and utter history of Britain, which has, and I remember seeing they found some of those episodes in Missing Believed Wiped. It's much more adult, and they are rape jokes. It's a whole rape joke Middle Ages skit. And so it's interesting that they could go from one extreme to the other. When you think about the Horrible Histories crew, who went from making an award-winning children's television programme and their experiments with adult, content for grown-ups. I think it was Sky where they got their break with Yonderland. It's interesting. There seemed to be more fluidity in 1969 for performers to move between so-called children's and grown-up entertainment without being labelled and kept in a box.
Let's find out what was happening culturally in February 1969.
The number one singles across the month were Blackberry Way by The Move, If Paradise Is Half As Nice by Amen Corner, and Where Do You Go To My Lovely by Peter Sarstedt. It's controversial though, that one, isn't it?
It is. On BBC Radio, listeners woke up to the Tony Blackburn Show on Radio 1 and Paul Hollingdale's Breakfast Special on Radio 2.
UK cinema releases included the sex comedy Candy, starring Richard Burton, Charles Aznavour and Marlon Brando, Maggie Smith's The Prime of Miss Jean Brodie, I Am In My Prime, and Sweet Charity, a musical starring Shirley MacLaine. Well, from the ridiculous, with Do Not Adjust Your Set, to what many would consider the sublime, the opening episode of Civilisation, which debuted on BBC Two on Sunday the 23rd of February 1969 at 8:15pm. It was commissioned by the channel's then controller David Attenborough as a showcase for colour TV, and the 13-part series was written and presented by art historian Sir Kenneth Clark. A history of Western European civilisation from the end of the Dark Ages, now a problematic term I would add, Graham, up to the present day and told mainly through its art and architecture. The programme was a TV essay, that was the form, and it kind of invented that form, I think. No talking heads, just Clark addressing the camera as the production took in a total of 117 locations across 13 countries. It remains a high watermark in television history and was the direct inspiration, of course, for the BBC's recent Civilisation's Rise and Fall. And wasn't there a 2018 Civilisations with 3 presenters? And I've got to say, in this opening episode, we saw Ken, as I like to call him, pop up in Paris, Oslo, Nîmes, Iona, Poitiers and Ravenna. And those are just the places where he went. There's also all the places like Istanbul where the camera crew clearly went. And I also want to point out, I was fascinated this episode only had 1 million viewers when it transmitted originally. But, of course, word of mouth meant it rapidly grew an audience, and it was quickly seen as a landmark, and leaders were written in the Times hailing it as a masterpiece. And the only thing I thought it needed was a Space 1999 style this episode opening action montage of the locations.
I would think every show would benefit from a Space 1999 opening montage. Do you know what I wondered when I was looking at this, and what I wanted to put to you was, you've kind of walked down this road, with the Art of Persia.
Oh, yeah, I suppose so, yes.
So how does that kind of work? I assume, did Kenneth Clark never enter your mind?
Well, it's funny. The one that I always had in mind when I made a previous series called Islam Unveiled for Channel 4 was Jacob Bronowski's The Ascent of Man, which was a very similar, again, 13 parts, something about the 13-part series for these series essays. Again, one person speaking to camera, amazing locations, and his thesis kind of told through these places. That was very much on my mind. And in fact, in the documentary I made for Channel 4, I actually filmed a whole sequence on a tram in Istanbul in homage to a sequence that Jacob Bronowski did in a tram in Vienna explaining, I think, Einstein's theory of relativity. Sadly, my sequence got cut. But I knew about this, and, like from the moment it begins with the long, heavy organ music, the title sequence alone, Graham, is 1 minute, 40 seconds. Just the luxury of that. The episode's called The Skin of Our Teeth. So it's quite edgy. There's a moment in it where he talks about the 8th and 9th centuries being like a long western. There are sheriffs and there are outlaws. So his ability to paint images that connect to a modern audience, it's really striking how it's not an old-fashioned bit of storytelling. It's quite edgy in that sense. And he's so unashamedly confident of his thesis and very genial, sitting in his buttoned-up suit and tie by a Roman viaduct. I mean, I love, the way that Claudia Winkleman has that whole thing of what she wears in Traitors. I think there should have been a whole thing about Kenneth Clark's look, because he has this Jacques Tati coat, which he wanders along the beach in Iona, and occasionally has a hat. And you just think and some sensible brogues. There's no sense of dressing for the weather. He just dresses as he always dresses. I loved that. I loved it. What did you think?
Well, I mean, similarly. Well, actually, there's a bit I want us to listen to, and then I want to come back on that about how he, as you were saying, how he addresses the audience.
But thinking about this almost incredible episode does tell one something about the nature of civilization. It shows that however complex and solid it seems, it is actually quite fragile. It can be destroyed. What are its enemies? First of all, fear. Fear of war, fear of invasion, fear of plague, fears that make it simply not worthwhile constructing things or planting trees or even planting next year's crops.
Yeah, what really struck me here, and I'm kind of chiming in really with what you've just said, is he's a natural communicator, but the way he addresses the audience, I feel he addresses them as peers. There's not a kind of a talking down to. He lays in enough for someone, an ignoramus like me, to be able to kind of clutch on and follow on to what he's talking about. But he doesn't do it in a patronising or even a hectoring or a teacher, not even in really a teacherly way. It feels like a conversation. And also a joined-up argument. And I think some of the ideas he has are really arresting, and they're not too complicated. So things like civilization came from conflict, I think, is a very interesting point of view. Yeah. And boredom is a force for the end of civilization. I think that's really interesting. And art is an effort at perfection. And I think they're just kind of quite simple things. So even from the fact that the episode, as you've said, is called The Skin of Our Teeth, that itself is a very common phrase. There's nothing highfalutin, is there, about that as an episode title? So I find that really interesting. The other thing that really struck me, and I've been noticing this a lot with almost all of the telly that we've been watching is he talks about recent fears that civilization is going to end. And that seems to come up all the time.
Well, that's about the nuclear fear, isn't it?
It's about the war, and it's also about the war as well, I think.
Yeah, well, the other thing about the war is there's that bit where he's references...
So it was with the Franks. Clovis and his successors not only conquered their enemies, but maintained themselves by cruelties and tortures, remarkable even by the standards of the last 30 years.
So that really kind of made me kind of draw my breath, because that really gave it a good bit of context.
Yeah.
But I just find it very interesting, and, you know, probably more so than, and for reasons that we always seem to be in these shows anxious about what's going to happen next, and are we living in the last days, I suppose.
Well, there's this interesting contradiction in this show. On the one hand, I agree, he doesn't talk down, and there's a great sense, very early on, he talks about, you know, a mother with her children and the anxiety about the Vikings and the barbarians. He's not afraid to use sweeping terms like the barbarians coming. But because he's focusing on what it would be like to be an ordinary human being, he's connecting us to them. We are the same people. There's not the sense that they were a different race because they lived 1,000 years ago. So I like that. But on the other hand, some of the sweeping ideas he makes, I'm not convinced by the idea that civilization was exhausted. I mean... you know, and his view of, you know, there's no mention, I was struck by there's no mention of serfs or slavery in this episode. There's a very rose-tinted sweeping view of the discipline of building that bridge. He asks a question like, it produced a culture, but was it a civilization? And I thought, well, that's an interesting question. But then he says, you know, if there's no sense of permanence, then it's... And he basically compares barbarians to Irish travellers. Cue a shot of Irish travellers in their caravans going over the hill. And I don't know if they knew when they agreed to be filmed that was how he's going to be using it. And he talks about, you know, this culture, I don't know, was it the Franks not building any stone buildings except one in Poitiers, which he says is pitifully crude, but... It isn't just a wigwam, which is and I don't know if he thought what he was doing, but he's basically saying that the Native Americans do not have a civilization. That they have a culture, but they're not a civilization. And I mean, it's a nonsense. I mean, that thesis, that's where I think people have legitimate problems with the sweepiness. But I mean, it's odd to say it's a minor quibble, because that's quite fundamental. But doesn't stop me from thinking this is a fabulous programme. There are hints of so much more that you want to go and find out. The only thing I thought was a shame was he's in a museum, I presume it's in Oslo and Gotland, and he says they're original Viking longships. There's 2 of them, and they're beautiful. You just need a caption on the screen to tell you which museum, you know, because people would want to know, and they might possibly visit. But of course, this is a time when foreign travel, certainly people aren't going to some of these very culturally rich historical places. They might be starting to discover the package holiday. But I love the idea of introducing people to these places where you might want to visit, these museums, and discover their treasures. And there's a list of the museums in the end credits. But I thought it was a bit of a shame they didn't put a caption up on any of these locations to tell you, unless he was there telling you himself where he was. There's also a couple of things which horrified me. As someone who, in Art of Persia, you know, I did handle antiquities, but... You know, there were rules. You held gloves, you wore, you know, special gloves to hold them, and you had rules about how you held them. And there's a scene where there's a giant, very heavy cross, like a kind of, you know, major piece from the era of Constantine, I think. And he's just turning it on the table. It looks really heavy if that fell over. And second, he's not wearing any gloves. And I just thought that would horrify modern conservators, I thought. The other thing that struck me was the soundscape of this. So there's that amazing music. Sometimes it's, you know, monastic chanting or choral music. Sometimes it's the heavy organ. But crucially, this is a show that is not afraid of narrator silence. You'll have seconds and seconds where you're just looking around, that the camera is panning around Hagia Sophia in Istanbul, and you're just able to revel in the view as if you were there. And that sense of television taking us into the picture rather than telling us and showing off that I'm here and you're not. I love that. And then the stuff I learned. I didn't realise that most of the Celtic crosses in places like Iona were thrown into the sea during the Reformation. I didn't realise that the crucifixion only became a big Christian theme as late as the 10th century. I mean, I love that. I didn't know that.
We've grown so used to the idea that the crucifixion is the supreme symbol of Christianity that it's a shock to realize how late in the history of Christian art its power was recognized. In the first 6 centuries, the crucifixion is practically never represented. And the earliest example, on the doors of Santa Sabina in Rome, it's stuck away in a corner, almost out of sight. It's not only obscure, but unmoving.
I'm glad you said that, because when he said that, I thought, I've never thought, I hadn't realised that, and I thought, well, maybe this is my ignorance. I mean, all I really know about Samira is telly. And so the fact that struck you as well, because, as you said, it wasn't a mainstay in Christian art because it wasn't good PR. People don't really want to be reminded that this could potentially happen to you if you were a Christian. So I found that really fascinating.
Yeah. There's also a great line where his view of barbarism is no books, no light after dark. And I thought, it would be a nightmare. It would be Ken Clark's ultimate nightmare. No books and no light after dark, which I just thought was so touching. And the other great thing is, of course, I feel awful to recognise it for this reason, but Skellig Michael, which is one of the kind of great Irish rugged islands where Christianity took refuge and where he films, is now probably best known for being in The Last Jedi, where Luke Skywalker milks a large-breasted alien creature.
That's the apotheosis, really, for, I think, the Skellig Michael story. And do you know what? I was doing a little bit of reading about the background of Kenneth Clark, and there's so many things you could say about him, but of course the thing that really struck me was that he was the chairman of the Independent Television Authority when it launched in 1954, and he recalled being booed at his London club, the Athenaeum, after his appointment was announced. However, it's said that it was this experience and his disappointment with much of ITV's output that actually prompted him to sort of jump over and start making arts programming when he stood down in 57. So ITV is responsible in a roundabout way, let's say, for
Kenneth Clark.
And Civilisation.
It's funny, isn't it? I mean, ITV has produced some really great arts programming, and as we're going to talk later, I mean, some great, original drama. But I think apart from the South Bank show, it's not really tackled great traditional history, I think.
But I always thought there are genres that ITV just aren't for ITV in a way. I don't mean that in a patronising way, because they also can't do lifestyle. It's very strange. I don't feel that they've ever had a great, strong lifestyle show. Cookery doesn't really work on ITV. ITV is certainly for something. I don't know what. And the things we definitely know what it can do well, which is drama and comedy and soap.
Yeah, one of the things you notice here is because the commercial breaks are about no more than every 15 minutes. So for example, Do You Want to Just Your Set, you get the commercial break after you've really had a chance to get into the skits and get to know the different actors and recognise them. And I can still really remember the experience of watching television as a child in the 70s. And it's not just about attention spans being short or anything now, or longer then. It's just you need a certain amount of time to get into the show. And if it's constantly cutting away to adverts and then cutting back, you never really get to grips with what you're watching. There's no sense of continuity. And 1969 feels like television has really matured. You've got all these long-form new ideas. You've got comedy shows that are half an hour for children. You've got these, serious cultural documentary series on the BBC, and they luxuriate in the time they have. And it's a really mature art form, television.
I think there's also a bit of a swagger in a good way, isn't there? That this is telly realising that actually it can do landmark things. It can do big things like Civilisation. Whereas before it was slightly an apology, or it was a fusion, wasn't it, of radio and theatre. But it wasn't cinema. And I think this is now we're really getting to the point where telly is its own thing.
Absolutely. Yes, and it's creating a new idea of how history exists. It casts a long shadow. I think it's really striking how some of the imagery of it, so the presenter in a fantastic location, or the beautifully rostrum shot objects, these things are all established in Civilisation, and great televisions continued it. I just wanted to mention the rostrum work very early on. We start off in the beauty of Paris and the Gothic architecture, and you get the sense of, but the Vikings and barbarians are coming, and it does these great crash zooms and jump cuts to objects, to the prow of a ship, which looks like a kind of evil contorted thing. It's almost like out of a horror film. And that Civilisation wasn't afraid to use those filmic effects for the purposes of conveying to the audience an emotional connection to the history being told. I love that.
So let's take a look at the ratings in February 1969, and singer and entertainer Max Bygrave's self-titled Thames variety show Max dominated with 8.2 million households tuning in. Meanwhile, Coronation Street and ATV's business drama The Power Game came in joint second with 7.9 million, and Thames's talent show Opportunity Knocks followed with 7.5.
And it might be worth reminding people that that figure of households represents maybe 3 or 4 people, so you have to triple or quadruple those numbers.
Yeah. big numbers.
Yeah. Meanwhile, news broke that David Frost had signed $1 million contract for a series in the summer with the Westinghouse Broadcasting Company of America, and in doing so became the first British performer to be the host of a major talk show in the United States. And Frost would famously commute between London and New York.
This month would end with the arrival of a hugely popular sitcom, On the Buses, commissioned by Frank Muir at London Weekend Television. And do I see a hard stare from you there, Samira?
Yes, I'm afraid I loathed that show. I think we should look at it for a reason, but oh God, it was so ghastly. Peeping Tom of a show, that's all it was.
The funny thing is this period marked a turnaround in LWT's fortunes, having come on air the previous year following the ITA's review of ITV franchises in '67. So big hitters such as Yorkshire, HTV and Thames Television had also come into being, but almost all of them were being criticised for the poor quality of their programming. And LWT in particular, well, it had begun with high-minded aspirations, but in the stead of On the Buses, Muir also commissioned another BBC reject, Please Sir.
Yeah, and comedian Kenneth Horne died on Valentine's Day while handing out prizes at the annual Guild of Television Producers and Directors Awards. And Graham and I recently saw at the BFI's Missing Believed Wiped event the rather extraordinary highlights show ITV put out the same evening, hurriedly put together and hosted by Michael Aspel. It was quite remarkable.
It's very odd.
Yeah, one thing what we were saying here, just given what you read about, the anxiety about poor quality programming, I was going through the Mary Whitehouse diaries, and in January 1969, so a couple of weeks before the shows we're talking about, she had a letter printed in the Times about this very issue, and she said, "The greatest challenge facing the arts is how to navigate the perilous course between adventure and discipline, how to move in new directions without rejecting as a matter of course those traditions of which we've grown to a considerable degree of maturity."
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. It gives me great pleasure to introduce to you the first of 3 plays written by Alun Owen. The play tonight is called MacNeil, and it stars Sean Connery. Do you believe that? Am I telling you the truth? I am. But if I'd said something entirely different, you might have believed that. After all, people lie to each other all the time. For fun, for gain, out of desperation.
That was Laurence Olivier teeing up our episode of Saturday Night Theatre, the TV anthology series which had begun on the 11th of January 1969. This instalment aired on the 1st of February, a Saturday of course, at 10 p.m. on LWT. The trilogy of plays Olivier refers to all look at different aspects of masculinity, and this one follows Sean Connery's deceitful and womanising master carpenter, who begins the story having just, to paraphrase his character's words, given his female boss one across the backside, and it ends in a confrontation with his daughter, who challenges him on a lifetime of deceit. The first thing I want to say, it's such a minor point, and then we can talk about the play itself. I love how Laurence Olivier walks into frame, and I'm always fascinated by old TV where the grammar is that it's deemed correct that we have to see people arrive. You can't just have them there. Yeah. They have to. It's sort of like the audience would just be too discomforted about suddenly this man is here.
It's also theatrical, isn't it? Then if someone walks onto a stage. And I think it's making that connection between theatre and television in the audience's mind. This is a different kind of storytelling.
Yeah, so, and I guess it does kind of grab the attention, doesn't it? And he does quite a good job of it. At the start, you sort of think, well, this is, he's just being a presenter, but then he really starts to kind of chew on his material, doesn't he, and putting forward the thesis. I quite enjoy that little intro anyway.
Oh, yeah. Well, I interviewed Waris Hussein, who I think famously directed Laurence Olivier in one of his last TV plays, a play he did with Joan Plowright, and he absolutely embraced technology. And I think it's really interesting when you see someone like Laurence Olivier, and this isn't as you say, it's an ITV show. It's a reminder that figures from high culture were happy to embrace all the new TV channels where the work was interesting. And the other interesting thing about this trilogy is it's about masculinity, but the only character who's in all 3 of the stories is, of course, the actress who plays the daughter, who's Anna Calder Marshall, who went on, I noticed, the following year to star as Cathy opposite Timothy Dalton in a smouldering Wuthering Heights, which is the one that, if you look at the posters for the Emerald Fennell film version that's out at, imminently, or out at the moment, I think, by the time this episode goes out. I think they're absolutely trying to capture the atmosphere of the 1970 film. There's something about, again, 1969, 1970, it's like Mary Whitehouse's letter. There's this bold new stuff going on. There's these traditional art forms, and they're all kind of fighting in the same space. And sometimes they're breaking the rules, and sometimes they're shaking things up in quite a dramatic way. And of course, it's Sean Connery, who had left, the Bond. He'd walked away after You Only Live Twice. This is the year that's right. Well, he didn't know he was going to come back. And I love that he's chosen to do this half-hour thing where he's playing this working class man.
She was there.
Miss Savile.
She went into playing the madam right from the off. MacNeil, she says, I'm seriously disturbed about your attitude. She had on that dress, the silky one.
Morgashell.
What?
The material, Morgashell, they call it.
Do they now? Well, it does nothing but good for her. Hey, control yourself. You want to give the place a bad name.
Oh, it's sort of going back to his roots in a way. And he is a bit of a misogynist. He's a liar. He's, a womanizer. So it's almost Sean Connery playing with the iconography and the mythology of James Bond.
So he's definitely an alpha male. And they presuppose that kind of women want him no matter how awful he is to them. And he's predatory. But I felt two things. I felt that he is a man who's slightly gone to seed. I sort of felt. I didn't think this is the most attractive Sean Connery that there is. And I also felt that there's a strange seam in this, that he has every right to be this predatory male in a way. Did you think that? I almost think there's a tacit approval really of how he goes about his business, being awful to women and basically trying to sleep with as many as he can.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting because I found myself quite disturbed when he first walks into the pub and you realise that two of the barmaids, they're both, without a word of dialogue, you have a sense about they're both sleeping with him too.
Yeah.
It's interesting that there are many more women. There's 6 women in this play to 2 male roles.
Yeah.
And he is a liar and he's undermined. So I don't know how the next episode has Michael Caine, the 3rd episode is Paul Schofield. I quite like the fact that you could see it's of its time, that perhaps there is a tacit approval from the writer's point of view, but I'm not sure it necessarily comes across entirely that way. I mean, what's disturbing is that the woman he's slapped, who comes to the pub to meet him, basically wants to sleep with him, even while knowing that she's probably making a terrible mistake. For me, it was striking that it's written by Alun Owen, who, was famously wrote the screenplay to A Hard Day's Night. Was a very established, very respected radio and TV playwright in particular. And I think, I haven't seen any of his other plays apart from A Hard Day's Night, so I don't know how typical this is of him. I guess it's also trying to be a bit of a provocation.
That's a good word. Yes, I think it is, isn't it? Why don't we listen to then this conversation with Sean Connery's MacNeil and Catherine Blake, who plays Miss Savile.
You're an arrogant man for a tradesman.
It's because I have a trade that I'm arrogant. I'll tell you how you can humble me for nothing. You show me a mortise or a dovetail joint that's botched, or put me on a job where I waste as much as half a plank of timber, and I'll give you the whip myself to crack over me. Do you understand?
Yes.
When I work, you can see the results. Pick it up. Use it. You see, fellas like myself, master carpenters, well, we're hard to come by, because we're the last of the good wine. Now, your sort, executives, male, female, or neuter, you can get by the dozen in any cut-price store and still get change out of a pound. You see, Miss Savile, as long as I've got my tools, I can earn my porridge.
Is that what's meant by the dignity of labour?
I neither know nor care. Just respect me and my function, and we'll get on fine.
It's really interesting. It's quite layered, isn't it, this thing, and that he feels, in part, he's sort of been disrespected, which shows a kind of a vulnerability on his side, but also there's the kind of hubris that he knows his worth, and he feels that she should know his worth as well. What do you feel about her character? We don't really ever get to know Miss Savile that well, do we?
No. I have a feeling she's a type that turns up in quite a lot of 60s films where she's sort of masochistic in a way. The sort of the powerful woman who really wants to be dominated. I'm always interested by how the actresses playing these roles, you think must have been feeling quite ambivalent about, well, it's this or no work. If you think of a film like Frenzy, the Alfred Hitchcock film, which has such amazing actresses in it, and it's a very sleazy film, but I sort of feel they their presence kind of... Maybe I just look between the gaps to see interesting women, and that's what I see here. I was struck by the confidence of its premise. It has one very short scene in a big warehouse, which is where you hear her yelp after she's presumably had the slap, and he comes down and he says to his friend says, what happened? And then the rest of it all takes place either in a pub or the flat where he shares with his daughter. It reminded me a bit of Alfie as well, the Michael Caine film, where Michael Caine his character is such a misogynist, and the way he talks to women. But the women are all played by these really interesting actresses. So I don't know. I was intrigued by watching it, and it left me wanting to see parts 2 and 3 because I knew that the daughter was going to be the focus.
What do you think it says about the style of writing? It struck me that actually there are 2 inciting incidents in this play, and we're not privy to either. So number 1 is him slapping his boss, and number 2, what comes out is that Mary, his daughter, has had a visitation from an aunt who has revealed to her that everything her father has told her about her mother and her own background has been a lie. I find it really interesting that those aren't actually part of the drama. Those are just things that are reported. It made it feel a bit like a play, I suppose, in a way. That felt to me quite a playwrighty sort of thing to do. What do you think?
Well, I think that's exactly what it is. I mean, it's only a half-hour slot, so you think about how little time that is, and you think even Radio 4 plays have tended to be 45 minutes. And we've got Sean Connery, so of course the focus is on him. I think it was interesting how little seeds are sown. He keeps saying things like, don't say that, only tinkers say that. And at first you think, well, that's just a bit of, a rather unpleasant banter from the period. And then it turns out to be really significant as to why he says that. There's a big revelation about identity and so on. So I think it's quite clever, and you realise Alun Owen was a respected playwright for a reason, that he structured things very well. And it's got a kitchen sink drama feel to it, of course, doesn't it? With the daughter and ironing his shirt and making his tea and all that.
And they are both gifted. I noticed they're both... Connery probably about twice, and Anna Calder-Marshall once maybe. They get these kind of bravura speeches, don't they? Even though Mary's one slightly tinged in histrionics, but I felt that was another very play thing, isn't it? Let's listen to her one where she's berating him that you never told me the truth.
Yes, you made a fool out of me, a muggins, a Charlie. You've got me to believe that my mother was an evil slut from a problem family who ran off and left her husband and child. And it wasn't true. Nothing ever has been between you and me. You've never told me the truth once. Have you? Have you?
And what's your feeling about that? I mean, again, it works, doesn't it? None of this feels like real life, but it feels like it feels like a play of real life, if you see what I mean.
It feels heightened, and it almost feels slightly worthy, doesn't it? Like this is a play about real life to prove that ITV can do proper contemporaneous drama. And you look at all those things like Cathy Come Home, which had come out 3 years earlier. You realise that the environment in which a TV play landed the bar was really high, and this is where you saw contemporary life presented in a way that took it seriously. I mean, I don't know what the audience for something like this would have been. I suspect it wasn't anywhere near as high as one might like to think. But I'm sure Sean Connery would have been a big draw.
Yeah, it ran for 5 years. It turned into the Sunday Night Theatre. I think the big one, the one that people might know, is there was a Frank Finlay one in 1973, The Death of Adolf Hitler, which he won a BAFTA for. But, I mean, did you enjoy it? I enjoyed it. It was very engaging, I thought, to watch.
It left me feeling disturbed. And in that sense, that the film Peeping Tom, Michael Powell's film, left me feeling disturbed. These women who seem to be engaged in a form of destructive behaviour with a man they know is a Lothario and a liar. But there is something compelling about it. And I just thought, well, why not make a play about that? You don't have to believe everyone's good. You don't have to think the women should know better. I like the idea that it's not afraid to show how women do get manipulated by men like this. In that sense, it rings very true, does it not, for all the debates going on now? This stirring opening music to Department S, one of the many adventure series produced by ITC. It stayed close to the production company's well-honed format of 2 men and 1 woman solving international crime. In the show, Department S is a section of Interpol set up to deal with especially baffling cases. And our central trio are former FBI agent Stuart Sullivan, played by Joel Fabiani, Rosemary Nichols as computer expert Annabelle Hurst, and Peter Wyngarde's flamboyant and hedonistic novelist. He is Jason King, and he got his own spin-off later.
He did,
not?
yes.
Yeah. So the episode we watched was One of Our Aircraft is Empty, which aired on LWT again on Friday, the 7th of Feb at 7:30 p.m. So absolutely weekend primetime viewing. When an airliner lands at the generically named London airport, but clearly Heathrow, with crew and passengers all missing, Department S are called on to investigate. And I should say, I rewatched this with my partner Philip last night, who said he didn't remember the plots being so silly.
Did he like it, though?
He did. Well, I think we just laughed at Jason King, who I've got to say, he again just feels like surely they were conscious of parodying James Bond. He's this, ludicrous hair, ludicrous moustache. His outfits, big puffy tie and matching shirt, mint green with a red handkerchief, a brown suit, pink shirt with an orange suit. And I was comparing it to the dandy-ish excesses of On Her Majesty's Secret Service with George Lazenby. But he's so sexist. And I just thought, is it a spoof? He refers to a sort of senior stewardess as a sky bunny. He stands too close to women he's trying to seduce. There's a peeping Tom Voyer element where he bursts into the female agent's bedroom while she's changing and gets a glimpse of her in her bra, and she points it out. And I just think, surely the audience must be thinking, this is not okay. And yet I'm guessing maybe there were equally members of the audience who thought, oh, I'd love to be Jason King. I don't know. I just thought it was bizarre.
To me,
I loved it, though.
It's a very adolescent view of a sophisticate's life, I think, in a way, even to the point of how the businesses and things in this work. But you're right, everything around Jason King is incredibly oversexed, even when he's giving dictation.
Mark Kane moved with the grace and speed of a panther.
It's accompanied by suggestive music. But I felt, for all his awful qualities, that he's a bit like Doctor Who in that whenever he isn't in the scene, you find yourself thinking, well, when's he going to come back on screen again? He's the one you really want to see. And he's a weird mixture, isn't he, of the establishment and the beatnik scene. He's a Timothy Leary-influenced John Steed. Although I just don't think he has that kind of twinkle. Peter Wyngarde doesn't have the Patrick Macnee twinkle, does he? I don't think. I sort of think he maybe, because he had some involvement in designing his own wardrobe, and I think maybe Peter Wyngarde isn't quite in on the joke, assuming there is a joke here.
Yeah, I think he isn't in on it. I think he takes it quite seriously.
Yeah.
And he is... It's hard to explain just how weird it is seeing him behave so inappropriately all the time. And every woman in every sequence, apart from Annabelle Hurst, who actually I think could do so much more screen time. She was the most intriguing character to me. She's the only person who sees through him, I think, and kind of puts up with him. And you realise all the tropes that still exist where, the brainy woman is the kind of lab technician essentially and sent off to go and look at her photographs or fly off and report your information while I'll do the real stuff. And the thing is, there's no sense of peril. You know that when Jason King turns up, he'll immediately know what's going on. Occasionally a gun is aimed at him, which he didn't expect. But he's got a John Pertwee-esque demeanour, but there's never any jeopardy for him.
Well, he doesn't take it seriously, does he? The character, I think, at times it's a bit of a laugh. He's pulling focus rather to the point that I have no real idea, for example, what Stuart Sullivan, that character, is about, other than he's the American that they brought in so that they can syndicate it to the US. But from watching this episode alone, I didn't really get what his specialty was or what he was about. He's a very buttoned up character, and I felt the character of Annabelle doesn't really get a lot to do either, really.
No, as I say, she doesn't. There are a couple of things that I noticed in this episode, for the plot for what it is, which is, why have all these people disappeared? The plane is found when it lands to be landed on autopilot. All the trays of food are there as if the passengers had just walked away from a meal. That's part of the mystery. The passengers don't look like they've died or been thrown off a plane or anything. And after 4 days, when Jason King comes back, the food is still on the trays in that plane. And you thought, well, that's an obvious non sequitur, it'd be pretty smelly by then. One thing I did like was the episode begins with a pre-title, and ITC, I'm guessing, we're very good at doing pre-titles to grab your attention, and it's just a glimpse of a scene from the middle of the episode where Jason King kind of cuts his way out of the sort of below the floor of the body of the plane, and he's in the kind of been in the hold.
All right, come on up.
And it's just such a lovely little way to say, well, what's going on in this episode?
Morning.
The other thing I did like was, although the whole evil baddie premise of it, which is this corporation where there's intrigue in the boardroom, it's Anton Rogers, who was number 2 in the best ever episode of The Prisoner, the schizoid man.
Yes, yeah.
And he's got a great sort of slightly chilling presence in everything he touches.
I'm awfully sorry, Mr. King, but I'm afraid you really are wasting your time.
Oh, it's mine to waste. I'm easily pleased. Cup of coffee, king-size sandwich or two.
I mean, the premise of Impossible Mysteries obviously makes me think of someone like Jonathan Creek, but it's a very delicious premise. But here, there is a scene where Jason King basically has to explain the plot, because there's so much they have to kind of unpack to work out why they did something so laborious as to take everyone off a flight.
In Dublin.
And pay them off.
The story beats the plots you usually dream up, Mr. King.
Possibly. Nevertheless, I believe that your chairman and managing director died on board that plane. If you think about it, and I have, it's the only answer. He used the pseudonym James Walters. The crew were obviously aware of his identity. Perhaps some of the passengers recognized him. You had to make certain they didn't talk?
No, you don't understand.
Quiet.
There's no point now.
Let me decide that.
You're forgetting yourself, Robert.
The other thing that made me laugh is the fact that, yes, there is a section set in Ireland. Not one Irish accent is heard, is there, while they're on their sojourn to Ireland. And it really made me feel that it's... I kind of admire the whole ITC ethos of how they put these things together. This show was created by Monty Berman and Dennis Spooner, and they brought us The Champions, and they would go on to do Randall and Hopkirk, Deceased and The Adventurer. And as we've said already, the formula is kind of 2 men, hopefully 1 American, 1 woman solving crime. With this, the main cast are usually studio bound. If we do see them outside, it's normally doubles who are playing them for the exterior filming. And of course, like a lot of ITC shows, it makes a lot of use of stock footage as well for establishing shots.
Oh yeah, so airports and
Paris and and the other thing that's kind of interesting is that the very first episode of this whole series was something called 6 Days, which was about an aircraft that is delayed by 6 days, although crew and passengers have no notion of this, which is really, really similar to this story. And the reason for that is because they actually got, as you've surmised, access to Heathrow, so they filmed them both back to back. So you've got these 2 episodes that are essentially the same story.
But it does have a great title sequence.
Oh, a title sequence is superb.
So much of the stuff that really grabs you.
Yeah.
It's a beautiful piece of music, and it's a really elegantly edited title sequence. And the thing that really jumps out at me, one of the reasons I think we remember these ITC shows with such affection, is they're filmed lusciously on film.
Yeah.
And they feel luxurious. They feel like a mini feature film in an hour.
Well, let me just talk a bit about the music, because it was Edwin Astley who was the composer, and he had also done things like The Saint, The Adventures of Robin Hood, Danger Man, The Baron. But do you know what else he did that we've already discussed?
Oh no!
Civilisation. So isn't that interesting? Because there is absolutely no linking sort of motifs at all, is there? Civilisation is very grand, very stoic, and it's very what you need it to be. Patrician. And then you think about all these jazzy, exciting, pulse-pounding theme tunes that really get the adrenaline going. I think Edwin Astley is actually quite underrated, isn't he? He should be up there with kind of John Barry, I think, or Ron Grainer.
Quite right.
The other thing that I found really interesting is the department boss, Dennis Alba Peters, who was played by Curtis Sertzi.
Who's black.
I'm sorry to disturb you.
You obviously thought the matter urgent.
And he is absolutely part of establishment life, and he's absolutely the highest echelon, and it's absolutely not mentioned that he's black.
Are you quite sure about this?
The photograph makes it more than possible, if not conclusive.
Does Sullivan know?
not from me.
He doesn't have much of a role in this. He's basically at the opera and is interrupted by Annabelle, who's come to give him some information, which it's like no one ever seems to use the phone. They just like get on a plane and take this piece of information to another exotic location that we will not show, except in stock footage. But I hope he gets to do more in other episodes, because I think it's so interesting how TV like this, for all its faults and the things that date it, it's also actually pioneering in putting people of colour into strong leading roles. I mean, I suppose American shows are doing it all the time, like Get Smart and those kind of spy spoofs and things.
Yeah. And maybe cynically part of that is an eye to making it work well for syndication in the US, but I don't really think that matters. The way it's done so kind of passingly and it's not a big deal, I think is very commendable.
Yeah, well, it's true of, I mean, the Schizoid Man, for example, that episode of The Prisoner I mentioned, it stars Earl Cameron, who I interviewed actually when he turned 100, who plays number 8 in that episode. And nothing is made explicit about him being black in the village, but there's a line where he says, in Haiti, we would say he has stolen his soul. And so just by the reference to Haiti, it is acknowledging that he's a person of colour and he brings a different experience. And there's another ITC show. In fact, there's a Sikh who's a resident of the village that you see in that episode. I always notice these things. People say, in the past, television represented Britain the way it was. There's people who want to complain about showing diversity. Well, actually, you look at television of the 60s, this amazing golden age, and it's showing a modern and diverse world.
Okay, so at the start of our discussion with this, you mentioned that you and your partner had watched this last night. Are you going to watch any more? Or has your...
Not of Department S,
no, okay.
I have to say. It feels a bit limited, unlike something like The Avengers, which, had so much more to it. There you see them on location. I think this feels a bit like, you can, as you say, there's a formula and you realise they're mostly shot in offices. I'm glad I watched one, and I spotted another connection to A Hard Day's Night, which is Adina Ronay, the fashion designer, who was also in A Hard Day's Night. She's one of the girls in the nightclub who has her boot up on a boyfriend's hand being erotically cradled while they're chatting to John Lennon, as I've been researching for my book about the film. But I love that they're all in the same world. These actors are moving through, ITC dramas, they're moving through films of the Beatles, they're working in plays written by Alun Owen. It's a really exciting landscape, I imagine, to be a playwright. You were writing for television as well as theatre. You were writing for radio as well as theatre. The boundaries between genres really broke down, I think, in the 60s. And that must have been a thrilling time, both for actors and for theatre makers and producers, to feel you could spread your wings and try out these new formats. And historians now making, these documentary series where that are just giving lectures or talks in a university.
You and I have been asked quite recently and a couple of times for our favourite era of television, and you and I have both kind of gone for early 80s, but is this making you rethink? You seem very taken with what we've watched today.
Yeah. I think whenever I've gone back to see things like Missing Believed Wiped, or you look at the Joe Orton play, The Erpingham Camp, which is based on a Euripides play about the Bacchae, you just think, my God, this is such great, interesting, exciting, rule-breaking drama. And I'm so glad that much of it has survived. I think 1969 would have been a thrilling year to be a young person watching television. I was only a year old, so I'm afraid I have no memory of watching this stuff. But the range of things, especially the sense of colour and energy and the use of stuff shot on film. I think it makes a real difference that a lot of the great shows that have become cult TV from this era were shot on film. It shows a seriousness about the visual impact of television. And by November 1969, BBC One goes all colour. So I think, we're at the cusp of this revolution. Most of these shows being seen in black and white. I think only half the British audience could even receive a colour picture at this stage in 1969. But the idea that they're thinking ahead and television is absolutely ready for the world to explode into colour. It's all happening by the late 60s. And if you look at what's happening in cinema as well, all these great films from the 60s, all that energy must be affecting television too. So I think 1969 definitely makes the case. Well, that is it. We have reached close down for another episode. But as we always say, if you do want to drop us a line about anything on this edition, you can contact us by writing to email@squarewindow.co.uk or looking up Square Window Pod on social media.
Next month, we'll be jumping forward by 10 years to look at programmes from March 1979. Now, we've just been talking about what is the best year of telly. Is this going to be the best year of British TV, as you have apparently claimed in the past, Samira?
I have claimed. I don't know now. I'm now conflicted already because of 1969, but I think 1979 marks the beginning of an amazing golden age. And these are the shows we're going to be looking at. Sci-fi series Blake 7, about to be remade, of course, as we know, in the contemporary era. Michael Aspel's astrological-themed entertainment show Star Signs. An episode of Man Alive, following one family through a series of counselling sessions. I hope that's going to be as exciting as it doesn't sound. And the Kenny Everett video show, which is brilliant.
And actually, we're planning an extra episode also for March, based around, well, Kenny Everett, but we'll tell you more about that next time. Until then,
goodbye.
Thanks for listening to Through the Square Window.
This was a Square Window production with music by local teenagers.
Our podcast logo was designed by Stuart Manning.
Do subscribe and tell other people about us. And if you're inclined, please leave us a review on Apple Podcasts.